Lisa,
Yes, baby girl.
when I grow up, I want to be a woman to society.
Then so shall you be. Hey, this is Lisa Landry. Welcome to Menace to Society. I have the great privilege of sitting down today with Robin McHaelen. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking a break from your busy work. I know you're an extremely busy woman. And you're here and you are in charge, for lack of a better term, for True Colors.
Right.
And is this only in Connecticut?
Yeah, sort of. So let me just, True Colors, first of all, what you should know is that True Colors does education and advocacy for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, two-spirit, same-gender loving, pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straightish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, bi-gendered, pangendered, agendered, asexual, non-binary, and other sexual and gender minority youth. We work with teenagers. And so, we are a statewide, we're a statewide agency in Connecticut. But we do a lot of training nationally, and some of our programs have a national impact.
And that would be, I think, because of your work in the 90s, perhaps.
Well, it started in the 90s, I'll tell you. The agency started as a fieldwork project when I was getting my master's at U Conn.
Okay.
And so in year one, when I get a picture, I'm working for the phone company, right? And up until, I didn't come out till I was 32. And then after I came out and I was working for the phone company, I was thinking, like, this job doesn't mean anything. I don't want to do this. So I started taking classes at the School of Social Work. Finally, I matriculated, and in my first year at the School of Social Work, my project was a needs analysis survey of the LGBT community in Greater Hartford.
And what year was this?
This was in 1993.
93.
And so we did, a little group of us, including my then first met her, but now my wife, we did this project, and we found like 100 different organizations that supported LGBT adults. Like however you could slice or dice a community, there was a group for it. So if you were into antique cars, there was a gay group for that. You wanted to be naked in the woods, there was a group for that, right?
Well, now we have Grindr.
Right, now we have Grindr. We don't need that, but back in the day, and then there was only 2 groups for youth in the whole state.
Wow.
So I proposed to the university for my second year that I would do a conference, and that the conference was supposed to be a one-time deal, but the kids that helped me organize it and I were really so transformed by the experience that we kept going. So the first conference was in 1994, and now we're going into the planning for our 25th annual conference. And it's now the largest queer youth conference in the country.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
To think from where you started to what you've built.
Right. From the phone company to this. But actually, I think that what I discovered was my life's work in that conference, and working with marginalized kids, and remembering how hard it was for me when I was coming out, and not wanting other kids to have that same experience.
What do you mean by marginalized?
Well, I think that back when I started in the early 90s, Connecticut was a little ahead of the curve, so it already had civil rights legislation that included sexual orientation, but kids were still so stigmatized. How there was one of the youth groups, how they found kids? They went to the library, and they went into this is back in the day now, so there's like a card catalog, and under homosexuality they would put flyers for the program, where they would go to the dictionary, and under homosexuality they would put because it was still a really stigmatized. The first time I went to a gay pride parade in Connecticut in the early 90s, people were still wearing masks, right? And so
wow,
yeah, so
like it was
really,
Mardi Gras.
Yeah. And so the people wouldn't know who they were. That people used to stand on the side of the parade route going, shame, 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 right?
In the 90s?
In the 90s.
In Connecticut?
Yeah. So that was the Blue Berets. It was a group of Catholic women that wore little blue berets and would stand on the side and yell, shame, shame, shame.
How very sad. While the
hiss.
Priests are touching their own children, they're coming out and judging you.
I know. So we just used to say shame back.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, hopefully those sisters have seen the light.
Maybe. That was 25 years ago, so maybe many of those.
We're only okay with gay priests.
Right, exactly. I want priests to not touch children. So
Me
of
too.
any orientation.
Wouldn't that be awesome if they would just
Right.
knock it off?
You know, now that there's altar girls,
Yeah.
they're touching girls now.
Yeah.
So mostly they touched boys because there was only altar boys. Now that there's
Opportunity.
altar girls, it's
It's a whole new world over there.
It's an all gender harassment. Right.
We're moving up.
Right. So I think that the kids were really marginalized. That we started working with the Department of Children and Families because so many of our kids are still thrown away by their families,
And that's still today.
Still today. So like sometimes today, a kid comes out and everything's fine. Like their families are fine, their school's fine, everything's fine. Sometimes a kid comes out and their whole world implodes. Yeah. We've got 40 or 50 kids in our mentoring program, all of whom are under the care of the Department of Children and Families, mostly because of rejection on the basis of their orientation or gender identity.
People don't realize, I think, that kids literally get thrown out the house.
Exactly.
I remember I grew up outside New Orleans, and we would go and hang at the gay clubs a lot in the French Quarter,
Right.
and we'd be 14, 15 years old,
Right.
and they would let us in, not knowing if we had literally been thrown out of our
Exactly.
homes. They wouldn't serve us booze. We could come in and have a Coke, which they
Right.
weren't supposed to give us either.
Right.
But anyway,
But the bars often were the places that tried to protect kids because the kids were looking for community, looking for some place
and
to
they didn't want
be.
the kids turning tricks.
Right, exactly.
They'd ask, do you have a place to sleep tonight?
Right.
What are you doing
Exactly.
here? Yeah.
Exactly. And, gay kids and gay, lesbian, bi kids represent between 5 and 9% of the population, depends on what study you look at. Trans kids under 1%. Together, they represent 40% of the homeless youth population. So even now, that's in 2017, that there's still a lot of stigma, and there's still there's messages that they're getting from, state, local, federal governments that are very different today than they were a year ago.
Yeah.
And that's having an impact too. So.
Yeah, it's got to be having an impact. Do you have more kids calling you now than before?
Yeah. One really sad statistic that really freaked me out, that in Connecticut, 9 children, between January and June, 9 children died by suicide in Connecticut. 3 of them were LGBT, so that's 33%. But what was devastating is that 5 of the 9 occurred in January, and I looked at 16 years of data, and there has never been a surge like that in January. I have to think that there's a connection between the political climate and that sudden rash of suicides. There's nothing else makes any sense to me. Crisis lines, suicide hotlines, the numbers skyrocketed after the election. That people are terrified. They don't know what's going to happen. What's happened has been really clear when you look at the rollbacks for trans rights in particular, and the religious exemptions and the things that are happening at the federal level. People had a right to be afraid.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear mongering going on with reality is setting in that
Yeah.
things are being affected
Yeah.
that shouldn't be
That's
touched.
right. That's right. That's right.
How many kids nationwide do commit suicide?
I don't know the number altogether. What we know is that kids who have family support are significantly less likely, that the number one protective factor is the response of their families. When their families are supportive, those kids are really not at higher risk than most other kids. When their families are rejecting, that's what correlates with every risk factor you can name. So suicidality, substance abuse, running away, truancy. And we work a lot with a researcher named Caitlin Ryan. She does the Family Acceptance Project in San Francisco. And her research is really interesting because one of the things she talks about is that the risk factors for kids whose family are accepting is significantly lower than for kids whose families are rejecting. But what's interesting is that the risk factor for kids whose families are ambivalent, so like sort of supportive but not really supportive.
Passive-aggressive supportive.
Right. So passive-aggressive supportive. That's a great way to phrase it.
I grew up in the South.
Right. Is actually much better than rejecting. So it's not as good as supportive, but it's nowhere near as bad as rejecting, which means that we can work with families and help them move from, obviously you want them to go to accepting, but at least if we can get them to go to ambivalent, you can decrease the risk factors that their kids will face.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah, it is sad.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It's your
We
kid.
teach families to say things like, okay, you're not happy about this. I get it. So go to the school and say, yeah, I wish he would stop carrying the purse too. But he's going to carry the purse, and it's your job to keep him safe. Figure out how you're going to do that.
Yeah.
So that you can be ambivalent but still protect your kid.
What do you think the discrimination and the anger towards transgender comes from?
Lack of knowing. I think that if you think about, and I've been doing this for a long time now, so I will ask a group of people when I'm doing a training, how many people in here know somebody personally who's gay, lesbian, or bisexual? And literally every hand in the room goes up. I think it's been 5 years since I've done a training where every hand in the room hasn't come up. And so face-to-face interactions over a period of time is the best source of prejudice reduction. I ask people then, how many people know personally somebody who identifies as transgender? And then literally 10%, 15%, 20, never more than 20% of the group raises their hands. So most people think they don't know anybody who's transgender. And it's really easy to demonize
what
that
you
which you
don't
don't know, right? And so, it's easy to make them other, and especially the current administration, trots out trans people and throws them under the bus every time they do something stupid that they need to, change our attention, distract our attention from.
What do you think that is? Like, why all of a sudden is this trans thing a thing? When it's something.
Why do you think do I think there's been the rollback?
Yeah. And I want to ask you also,
Yeah.
I want to make it clear, you were a social worker of the year in Connecticut.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting down with somebody extremely knowledgeable. This is a very competitive state. This is Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite an honor.
Thank you.
So I'd love to, I didn't mean to stop you.
So
But
no, I think that at the national level, that the reason trans folks, that there's, you look at the three groups that are being thrown under the bus: trans folks, black men, and undocumented immigrants, right? All three of those groups are groups which are very easy to demonize, which are easy to blame for things that are happening, and really easy to distract us. It gets us all caught up in talking about this stuff so that they can do stuff like decide that the war on coal is over. And that the Russia stuff, I think that there's either this guy is really a brilliant manipulator of the media, right?
Yeah.
Or he's straight ass crazy.
I can't make up my mind. I'll
I
be
don't know which one
honest.
it
I
is.
don't know. Some things he does, I'm like, that was brilliant.
Right.
I mean, I didn't vote for him.
Right.
I don't agree with most of the platform.
Right, but when
but
you
some
see
of it,
the
I'm
way-
like, whoa.
the way he's
Well
able
played.
to distract the media's attention. And so he picked three really marginalized groups that are easy to demonize, and every time he needs a distraction, he throws another one under the bus.
Here's a tweet.
Right, he does a tweet.
And then we all go running.
Right, exactly. And so trans folks, I think, are easy to demonize. And that and the new thing about, the religious exemptions, that, if you have, if you believe in a religious exemption that you as an EMT shouldn't have to treat, a gay or a trans person who's bleeding to death on the road. So I don't know what religion you could belong to that says, let this human bleed to death because you don't like what they do, separate
I
from
think
this.
there's a whole passage in there about don't be the Levite,
Yeah.
be the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, they're
it's,
missing.
there's somebody's missing the boat there
But
somewhere.
for me, it's a reading comprehension thing too.
I do think that's true.
I mean, I grew up Catholic, and
Me too.
I'm Jewish, but I still read the Bible. I enjoy it. I like Scripture, but I try to interpret it for myself. I don't let someone tell me what I'm supposed to be believing. And Jesus never cured gay.
Yeah, I know.
Like if you look at all the miracles
That's right.
he performed, he cured the blind, he raised the dead
Right.
inside. But if he had cured gay folk, and there was some old Jewish dude who brought Herschel and was like, get him off of Moishe's broke back.
Yeah.
That happened.
That's
It
right.
happened.
That's right.
Because parents want
That's
whatever they
right.
feel like their child is suffering through, and
Right,
especially
that's
in
right.
that time, you don't want your child stoned,
Right, exactly.
which is still happening
Right.
for being homosexual. So we would know that story. It'd be recorded, and Mike Pence would have that verse tattooed on his forehead. There'd be no discussion.
That's right.
So anyway, I think it's a way just to have bigotry back on the table. Myself personally,
that's right. I think there's open license to be mean now. You know that you know, I don't think that the world was ever not racist. I mean, we've always been racist.
Sure.
Right. But grown folk got the message to shut the hell up. Like you could be racist, but don't be saying racist stuff out in the public.
Right.
And now it's like there's a license for people to say the most horrific things about all different groups of people, and my people, are getting the bulk of it. So
yeah, it's a terrifying.
Makes me want to swear.
Yeah, you can swear here if you choose to. If you choose to, you will not be judged. I'm just saying. I do have a little blue language when I perform live, but I try to keep it in check here. Tell me about Gay Spirit Radio. Tell me what that is.
That's a relatively new project at True Colors, and there's a guy named Keith Brown who hosts a program called Gay Spirit Radio. He's been doing it at the University of Hartford for the last 37 years. He has literally not missed 1 week in 37 years.
That is dedication.
That is dedication.
Or an obsession.
I don't know which. Because he also like in the early days before they could really tape some of this, I mean, he has little tapes, but everything is handwritten on these yellow legal pads. And we had folks transcribing them, and so what, under the guidance of our archivist, Ira Revels, what they're doing is digitizing 37 years of this radio program and then making it searchable, putting it on a website and making it searchable so researchers and other people can listen to different elements of it. And if you think about it, that's such a huge segment of queer history in Connecticut and nationally. The topics, the conversations were really interesting.
That's fantastic that you're going to have all that archived too.
Right. And we're trying to raise a little bit of money right now to do some archiving of True Colors stuff. If you were in my office and you were looking around, you would see that there are boxes of stuff everywhere, and most of that is stuff that needs to be archived.
Some of it's been here since the 90s.
Yeah, some of it's been here since the 90s.
I noticed you have your award on the wall. You were Sexuality Educator of the Year.
Yeah. What
did that mean? Did you sleep with most students?
Well, I thought about sleeping with them, but then I decided, that wasn't going to work out for me. So I think it was just from training. We train about 6,000 people a year.
How many?
About 6,000 people a year. And last year...
That's the size of some towns,
I know. Last year we directly impacted 12,263 people. I know this because I just did a report on it. 12,263 people.
And what kind of knowledge did you share with them?
So we do cultural competency training. My job, I think, a lot of what I am trying to do is that if you are an educator, a teacher, or an administrator, or a social worker, or you run an after-school program, some of the people in your classroom or your program are going to be LGBT. So I think your job is to make sure that they are explicitly included in your program, because you're not just there to teach the straight cis kids, right? There's nothing in your contract that says, queer kids do not apply. Like, they're all part of the thing. And so I try to give people the skills to be explicitly inclusive, to make sure that as they look around their programming, that LGBT youth know that they're safe and welcome there. And so we train schools, social workers, clinicians. We work with families. And mostly we train professionals. Melissa, who runs our youth programming, they tend to train more of the youth. And so we run, the other thing that we try to do is give youth the tools they need to advocate for themselves. So we have a summer queer academy, we do gender and sexuality alliance summits, and community conversations and lots of things that give youth the tools to advocate for themselves and other people.
That's good, because you empower them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And a lot of our young people, have started with us and then gone out and created stuff in their own schools or in their own communities, which is really what our goal is.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great goal.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there's a teacher listening, perchance, what would the number one thing you could tell that teacher to engage these kids?
So the number one thing I would tell teachers is when you hear mean, intervene, right? Every single time in every single place. Because the research says if you ask a teacher, and I hear this all the time, if you ask a teacher, how often when you hear a kid being harassed, do you intervene? Teachers will say always or almost always. Then you ask the kids in the same classrooms, how often do teachers intervene? And they will say never or almost never.
I believe the kids.
Right, I believe the kids.
I believe the
and
kids.
A lot of times, it's not so much when a teacher's teaching the class, it's when they are writing on the board and the kids are talking among themselves, or they assign a group project, or they're passing in the halls, or they're in the bathrooms or the locker rooms, or in the lunchroom, and a teacher hears something, but they're not sure who said it, or maybe they really got to pee and they only have 3 minutes, right? So they feel like they don't have time. What I say is, if you hear something and you don't say something, you have said something. You said that what just happened was okay.
You're complicit.
Right, you're complicit. So teachers need to have in their back pocket 4 or 5 phrases that they use on the fly. You're running down the hall, you got to pee, there's something happening, you hear something, you flip around, you go like, I don't know who said that, but that wasn't cool. Cut it out. And you go,
brilliant, like a mom.
Right. Like a mom.
Like any mom.
Right. That was rude. Well, that was
right.
rude. That was mean. Ouch. Like you could say anything, but say something. So I think that's the single most important thing.
That's great.
And the second, because that's anybody, you can do that anywhere and any time. You could do that at Thanksgiving dinner with weird Uncle Al who always says stupid shit, right? So when you hear something, you say something. I think that's a key thing. I think that they could also think about the ways in which they make assumptions about who kids are based on how they look. And a lot of times with queer kids, if they fit a stereotype, like if a boy is very gentle, or a little bit feminine, or a girl is very athletic, then they'll think, okay, this kid might be, I better pay attention.
One of those.
Right. I better, use inclusive language. But if a kid doesn't fit a stereotype, they just assume that they're straight and cisgender, and they're making all kinds of assumptions about the kids that they serve. I teach people to say things like, good morning, class, instead of good morning, boys and girls, because maybe you've got boys and girls. You obviously have boys and girls, but you have some kids that are neither of those, right? Or you have kids that are trans. Where do they fit in your language, There's a joke that I tell teachers. I don't know if you can do it on your podcast, but I'll tell it to you.
You
anyway.
go ahead.
All right. So this is how you determine whether or not a toy is for boys or for girls,
Okay.
right? So first you ask the question, is this toy for a boy or a girl? Question number 1, do you play with it with your genitals? If the answer is yes, it's not for children. If the answer is no, it's for any child that wants to play with it.
Oh, that's
right?
awesome.
And so seriously, there's no such thing as girl toys and boy toys. There's toys, and children play with what they like. There's no such thing as girl hair or boy hair. There's hair, and people wear it the way they feel comfortable, right? And so, breaking those norms around this is what girls are supposed to be like, and this is what boys are supposed to be like. Because, lots of girls are very feminine, lots of boys are very masculine. Cool, do you.
Right.
But don't make the kids who are not try to fit into a box that doesn't fit them.
No, it just
Cut
makes
it
people
out.
unhappy.
Right.
Yeah.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
And who said that boys can't wear dresses? All boys wore dresses in the 1600s, right? Makeup was made for boys.
I forgot about all that.
Yeah.
But you're right. Even go back to ancient Egypt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Makeup was made for boys. The only women who wore makeup were the hookers, right? And courtesans. So, this is all stuff that's made up in language. It's nothing that exists in a biological rule.
Isn't that the greatest aspect of patriarchy, though? To give you double-think information?
Right, exactly.
To twist you up?
I went to see the Billie Jean King movie, and I forgot how incredibly direct the sexism was back in the 70s. I was at U Conn when Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs, and I remember that one of the things that happened was I was in the they had just made the campus that I lived on, the section I lived on, co-ed, and so I was in the girls' dorm, and there was a boys' dorm right next to us, and so the girls were all yelling all these things about, Billie Jean King, and so a group of boys came out in this line, and they marched towards the girls' dorm, and then they turned their backs on us in a big line and peed on the lawn, because we were saying, we can do anything, you can do better, and so the one thing they could do was pee on the lawn,
They peed
standing.
on the lawn?
Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, market that, buddy. So, but I was so struck with how blatantly sexist, things were.
They still are, though, aren't they?
Are.
I mean, like, not all
Yeah.
men. There are many
Right.
straight dudes who don't subscribe to all that
Right.
testosterone-y
But
nutty. But too many of them really
he
are very
who shall
threatened.
not be named,
Which one?
45.
Oh.
But I never.
See, my head goes to other ones. That's so weird.
Right. I cannot.
There's so
I
many.
cannot say his name.
There's
it
so many.
freaks me out. So.
No, I know. I'm a liberal, but I don't have that same. I mean, I'm a very frustrated Democrat right now.
Yeah.
So I guess
Yeah.
it colors my perspective,
Right.
especially as a Nevada resident.
Right.
I'm not in a blue state so much.
We really need all the old Democrats to go home.
Thank you, Mama,
You know?
for saying that. I was going to say thank you because we have actually spoken with a lot of women like you who dedicated decades to social progress, and there does seem to be a through line of thank you very much, and please
Time to go home now.
take your
Right.
take
That's
your
right.
plaques and
Yeah.
go golf.
Yeah.
It's okay.
And
go
I'm actually
drink.
trying to figure out what I'm going to do next because I think 25 years. I can't quite retire because when you work in a nonprofit, you don't have a retirement. As a comic, maybe you have a similar.
Yeah, we don't get health insurance or days off.
Right.
Nope.
And so I don't know what I'm going to do next. When you talk about the bathroom bills, that more members of Congress have transgressed in bathrooms than trans people have.
Yeah, I remember that airports, right? And they all, not all, but many of them, didn't they get busted?
Yeah, that people with
And
putting
Dennis
their feet in the
Hastert.
wrong, in the stuff. So
Yeah, you tap if you
yeah,
want
yeah.
service.
Yeah. So leave trans folks alone. They just want to pee.
Well, isn't there footage of Marco Rubio at a phone party?
I don't know.
In like Miami in the 90s?
I don't know. Maybe.
I saw a picture. I believe it.
There's rumors about Pence.
Pence? Well,
And that's why he's so conversion therapy focused.
oh. Usually you have a real problem with what you can't control yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. Actually, St. Augustine, there's a lot of stories about him. He's the one that sort of, that there were two theorists at the time. One was pro-sex, and then there was St. Augustine, who was really kind of anti-sex. And he was also a sex addict. And he used to write things like, please, God, cure me of this addiction, but not quite yet.
Right.
And so he's the one who sort of won, and that he did all these prohibitions about anything other than procreatic sex, that he tried to take all the pleasure out of sex because he was an addict and couldn't tolerate that in himself.
I'm not going to have it. You're not going to have it.
Exactly. And so when you look at the history of sexuality, that's where the sex negative perspectives really came from his belief that this was a terrible urge and it needed to be controlled, and so sex should only be for procreation, and there should be no pleasure, and
Well, he calls his lover mother.
Interesting.
His wife.
Interesting.
Pence, you know what I mean? That's his name for her.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So what kind
I thought
of...
we were talking about St. Augustine.
Oh,
I hadn't heard that.
No, sorry. I was going back. Because, whatever their relationship is their relationship. Who am I to judge it? But, I was married. I never called him father.
Yeah, that's a little icky.
It's telling.
I think that which you cannot be with in yourself, you hate in others. And actually, there's some research to back that up on, really homophobic boys.
Yeah.
That there's some evidence that really explicitly, wildly homophobic boys are probably struggling internally with some of their own feelings. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure a lot of bullies are acting out for that reason. That it's unfair. I'm not a social worker or therapist such as yourself, but I just know a lot of people, and some of them are raising children, and some of the kids seem unstraight to me. My brother's gay. I grew up in a house where somebody tried to mask it. My dad knew long before my mom did, or before my brother even. But which wasn't a problem for my dad. We're very lucky, or my brother. But it does seem like a lot of dads have a disconnect with this, and so they verbalize it, and that child is growing up in this home, and kid might be 7 or 8 and not even have a wherewithal to put these ideas together for himself yet, and dad's already busting on it.
Right. That's right. So you don't know what it is, but you know it's not okay. When I was growing up, there were these 2 women that lived on my street, and my parents never said that they were lesbians. They said they were like that. And so they would do this. They would do this like little air quotes with their fingers, and they would lower their voices and screw up their faces, and they would go, "Well, you know, they're like that." And although they were always really friendly to them to their face, they were often the butt of a lot of jokes behind their backs. So, you know, we moved there when I was 8 years old. So I didn't know what like that was, but I figured out pretty early that like that was not how you wanted to be. Right.
Queer!
And at the time when I was first sort of coming out to myself and recognizing I didn't have the same feelings as other girls, I only knew 3 lesbians. These 2 women that lived on my street and my gym teacher. And all 3 of them were very athletic, way into sports. My idea of exercise is reading an action novel, right? So I thought, oh my God, not only am I queer, I'm not even good at it. And it was very sad.
And this
Now
is before
I can laugh
Google.
at, yeah,
You couldn't just
before
Google.
There was
You
nowhere to
couldn't just
Google.
sort yourself out.
No. And then when I was 13, this girl, and I still remember her name. I won't say it out loud, but she was jumping from seat to seat on the school bus, and I didn't realize she was doing this with everybody. She sits down next to me and she goes, "Robin, can you put your chin on your shoulder?" Yeah. She said, "Well, you know what that means, don't you?" I'm like, "No. What does it mean?" She says, "It means you're a dyke." And so when she did it to everybody else, they said, "Get out of here, you stupid blah." Right? I said, "Oh my God, how did she know?" Right? Like, what did I do? Did I look at her funny? And I literally went silent for like a year. That they thought I was losing my hearing because I went so underground. I was afraid to look at anybody. I was afraid to talk about anybody. And so, you know, that's one of the reasons I do this work, because I don't want other kids to have those kinds of experiences. You know, once people find out, you might lose everything, and you know, and that's not what happened. By the time I came out when I was 32, and I called my mother, and I'm like, "Mom, I have to tell you something, I gotta come home." And I'm like sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm sobbing, right? And she's like, "Just tell me." I said, "Mom, I think I might be gay." And she said, "I know." I wanted to reach into her chest and rip her heart out. Because if she knew, why the hell didn't she tell me? Right? I had 15 years I had been dealing with this. And I think the truth was that she didn't know what to do. You know, like, she wanted to help, but she didn't know how to help. And so she just said nothing, you know. And then in my family, my mother was the purveyor of all truth and all information. So I just waited 3 days, and everybody else knew, and I never had to come out to anybody else.
That's excellent.
You know,
She took care of it for you.
She took care of it for me. Yeah.
I think people lose track of that, how many kids are affected by what's said to them, because you're trying to process and you don't have control over anything in your life.
Exactly.
You know, you're literally being told when to wake up, when to get on the bus, what to eat for dinner. No, you're not going to do that.
Right.
No, you can't have the phone. There's a lot of
Exactly.
And so you have all this other emotional upset, and where do you talk about it?
Exactly. And the average age that kids are coming out now is 12 or 13. So that really is, you know, a middle school discussion. And lots of middle schools are not having this discussion. They're afraid that, you know, parents will think they're talking about sex instead of talking about relationships and safety and inclusivity. So, you know, lots of high schools have GSAs. Very few middle schools have GSAs.
What's a GSA?
It's it used to be called Gay Straight Alliance, but that's really become, you know, too limiting. So a lot of people call it Gender and Sexualities Alliance. And so it's a club that is designed to work on sort of school culture, you know, educating teachers, trying to make sure that all the kids feel safe and welcome. And it's kids of all orientations and genders, so it's not just for the queer kids, it's for all the kids to create an environment that's safe. And we've seen, GSAs, create trainings for their teachers. They do the day of silence, or there's no name calling week. So there's all these activities that they do that are designed to create a safer environment, but they're afraid to have them at the middle school level because they think that there'll be pushback from parents, when in fact they're not talking about sex. They're talking about relationships and safety, and that should be part of the curriculum.
Yeah, no, I personally, I have a lot of problems with the way that education's being run. You know what I mean? Because I don't think we focus on these things. It's much more important that all the kids feel safe enough to just focus and learn.
Right.
And now you got people running on campus with guns, and goodness knows what else is coming.
Yeah.
So why would we not want to empower our children?
Right, exactly. It really is. And, I think the biggest thing, if you think about it, is that schools need to give children the skills they need to be successful in a diverse world. That everybody knows how to get along with people who are like them. We need kids to learn the skills to get along with people who are not like them. And the main reason that people are fired now is not because they don't know their jobs, but because they can't get along with other people. So if you're going to really give a kid the skills they need to be successful, then one of those skills is the skill to be able to get along with people who are not like you. You don't have to agree, but you have to be kind.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you see a trend in kids being kinder, the millennials, as opposed to the other demos?
Ish.
Do you find that I find that they're more accepting, the younger?
I think the younger kids
generations
are definitely more accepting. Like when I've done 18 or 20 trainings in Connecticut where elementary school kids, like kindergartners and first and second graders, have been making social transitions from one gender to another, and the kids don't have any trouble with that. You say, "This is John. We used to think John was a girl, but now we know he's a boy and his name is John." And the 5-year-olds go, "Oh, okay," right? And they go about their business. It's the teachers are going, "But where's John going to be?" Right? That it's the grown-ups that have the issue. The kids, they've grown up watching jazz and watching, Caitlyn Jenner, and they just have access to information that their grown-ups didn't have, and so I think that there's hope for this generation, at least on the coasts. That there's, I do a lot of training in different parts of the country, and different parts of the country have different levels of commitment to the idea of LGBT being something deserving of equal rights. That even though, you can get married in every state because of the Supreme Court ruling, in 2017 you could get married today and fired tomorrow in 29 of them, right?
I don't think people know that.
Yeah.
You can get fired in 29 states. In
29 states. And so if you don't have the laws and you don't have the protection of the policies, it's still really dangerous for people to be LGBT in certain parts of the country. That some people in the U.S. have it harder than they have in other countries, because...
Depending on your location.
Depending upon your location.
And what about, I know that they're definitively rolling back rights in Mississippi for foster care and adoptive parents. How does this problems of bigotry play out in family court or in criminal court?
Right. And in fact, Mississippi's always been an interesting city. Yeah,
you
state.
can say country. It's okay.
State. There's sort of a country.
I'm from
unto their
Louisiana.
own,
I've been to Mississippi a lot.
So Mississippi's always been. It was one of only 2 states that explicitly did not allow same-sex couples to adopt. And a friend of mine, she divorced in Mississippi and came out as a lesbian. Her husband was not prepared to care for their children. She was totally able and willing to care for the children, and the ex-husband wanted to give her custody. The the judge, the family court judge, refused to give her custody and gave the state of Mississippi custody of those 2 children because he wouldn't give custody to a lesbian. And so the dad ended up having to care for them and wasn't allowed to let them travel the mom moved up here, wasn't allowed to let them travel to see the mom under court order. And until they turned 16, when they had some say in things for themselves, they had to stay there with, a dad who loved them but couldn't care for them, right? And a mom who adored them and wasn't allowed to have them.
And Mississippi ACLU didn't do nothing.
They weren't able to do anything because it was in a statute. I think Mississippi and Utah, I believe, are the only 2 states right now that explicitly don't allow same-sex couples to adopt or foster. And the reason in Utah it doesn't say anything about same-sex. It says that, well, that's interesting. I just thought of that. It says that single people can't adopt or foster children. And since at the time that law came out, same-sex couples couldn't marry, that was how they did it. Well, now that same-sex couples can marry, I wonder how that law is playing out in Utah now. Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to have to go check that out now.
I wonder.
I just thought about that.
I wonder. It seems like so much progress is made in humans evolving, and our court systems are generations behind.
Exactly.
What is that?
Old white men.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I made a baby with one. I don't hate on old white men. I mean, my kid's going to be, a white man. He's Jewish, so it depends on what state he's in as what he's going to be considered.
But you think about who runs, who's doing all the policy work and making most of the family court decisions, especially at the higher levels. At the state level, there's a lot of women, in family courts and a lot of female judges, and a growing number of people of color. But at the decision-making level, where things are where things are overridden and
laws get put on
the books, that tends to be a much older, a much more male, and a much more white arena, and that's a demographic that tends to be more conservative than other demographics. And I'm not saying that in a mean-spirited way. It's just the reality of that. And
it's an observation.
Right.
It's statistics.
Right.
You can look at
numbers. Then the Republicans have been stacking those courts with very conservative people. And so they've been doing less. They haven't had as many options at the Supreme Court level. So they've been going to the circuit court level and the regional courts and stacking those with really conservative jurists. So that is having an impact, really across the country. And I think that happened under the radar. Like, people didn't see that happening.
We were all focusing on national progress and
exactly.
what's going on nationally.
And that we weren't looking at that. But most of the precedents are set at those regional levels.
I don't think people understand how much power city councils have.
Right. That's true, too.
They're deciding who gets your dispensary.
Exactly.
They're deciding who gets what.
Exactly.
They're deciding.
In Connecticut, every school district, and there's 169 of them, is their own little fiefdom. And their boards of education make all the decisions. So the Department of Education in Connecticut has no way to mandate anything. That they put out guidelines, but they can't mandate anything because each individual school district. So one of the things we're working on right now is trying to get comprehensive sexuality education in all of the school districts, not just inclusive of LGBT stuff, but comprehensive sexuality, since abstinence only doesn't work, and more kids get pregnant on abstinence only. We should be doing comprehensive sexuality education, but each little school board gets to decide, what.
Then what's the point of having it?
That's
another patriarchy double think, isn't it? Like, hey, we got this for you, but not you.
Yeah.
Not you, because your school board's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can't get these people off the school board because they're already there.
Right.
But
So
then
I
we're on
actually know a
TV.
lot of people that are running for school board. A lot of progressive people that are running for school boards because it's the only way that you can, start to get, some things changing. And when you look at the radical right and their strategy, one of their strategies was school boards, boards of education and small councils. That if you could run at that level, you could have a profound impact on the values of the town and what the town was able to do or not do. And that's actually a strategy. And so the progressives, we've been like, nah, that's all right. We'll just talk at them. We'll try to convince them to do the right thing. And in the meantime, they've been out there, like, doing it.
Yeah, getting it done and controlling the message.
Exactly. They are way better at the message than we are, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It's depressing actually. I think as a party we are falling way short of protecting our children and our women
Exactly.
badly.
Yeah.
But hopefully,
I forgot women were the other group that's been thrown under the bus.
oh my,
Especially
well, because
with
we're
regards
used to it.
Yeah. The only thing that's been at all heartening to me is more and more sort of progressive white folks are sort of waking up, and that even though a lot of people are saying kind of, in some ways, kind of stupid stuff like, oh my God, there's racism. And we're like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've seen more coalitions of people being in the streets and, closing things down and doing more direct actions than since in a long time. So maybe that, maybe the world has gotten so horrific that people who are situational bigots, the people who just never thought of it or never thought about it, might get shaken out of their, complacency and want to do something,
I hope so.
I hope so.
I see a resurgence. We're talking to people around the country, and people
Right.
definitely want to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
I get scared when we all start pointing fingers and insulting each other,
Yeah.
and I think too many of our leaders are doing that right now. And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, we have to figure out how to have multiple and varying views be present in the same room. Part of the problem is, though, that when your viewpoint marginalizes another human being, it's hard to make room for that viewpoint. So if you have a belief that abortion is murder, then you should have the right to have that belief, and you should absolutely be protected from having to have an abortion, and you should be able to pass those values on to your children and your families, but you shouldn't be allowed to pass your values on to somebody else in that situation. Or you don't like gay people. Gay people are human people, right? So how do I make room for you to have that belief that I don't deserve to exist? I don't know how to make room for that.
there's a big disconnect.
Right.
It's not like you're okay with raising taxes.
Right. And it's, and so if you were personally and if you were personally homophobic or personally racist, okay, do you? You can't really hurt me one-on-one. You could call me names, but I would probably be okay. But when you take that and you move it into policy and you move it into the imposition of that belief on my life, then how do I make room for that? How do I say you have a right to your own opinion when your opinion is transgressing on my right to exist? Right? And so that's the piece that I think is a real challenge.
I think that's a disconnect for a lot of people. That they're not seeing this as humans. These are humans that will be negatively impacted for being fired for being gay.
Right.
But there's a lot of false spin in the media right now where people are unaware of that.
Right.
I've got friends who are like hardcore right, and I don't vibe on a lot of their political beliefs, but we have other things in common.
Right.
We don't go camping together. You know what I mean? Like, we don't hang constantly. But I have this one person, and she was just like, what do they want now? What, they want another bathroom? You're gay. Who cares? And I'm like, yeah, but what you don't understand is actual rights are being taken away,
Right.
and we're being told it's about bathrooms at Target.
Right.
But that's not
It's
really
not
what
about
this
bathrooms.
is about.
Right, and you know, bathrooms is not about bathrooms. Bathrooms is about the right of transgender people to exist in public spaces. You know, that's a whole different thing. You know, that if you are not allowed to use a facility, how do you go out in public and have
Be
a
part of the
life?
community.
And be part of the community. That's craziness, right? That's craziness. So we have to reframe, we have to pull the dialogue back, you know, that trans people do not transgress in bathrooms. Trans people are transgressed upon in bathrooms by other folks.
Statistically, that's the truth.
And that's the absolute truth. And so, you know, we need to get, and interestingly, the thing that people are afraid of with trans people is not about trans people. It's about straight guys in dresses molesting children.
Right.
So maybe we should just not let straight guys go to the bathroom.
I'm okay with that. Like, but you know, 'cause, that is a valid concern.
You know?
Like I can
Right.
understand if you're the mother of 3 little girls and
Right.
you're very concerned. I get that. I don't want to minimize that.
Right,
but
but
the reality
but
is,
the
your
reality
kids are
is-
probably being molested by a priest,
Right.
a teacher,
Children
somebody
are
down
not
the
being
street, their
molested in
uncle, their
bathrooms.
father, the granddaddy.
Children
That's
are
who's
not
touching
being
your
molested
kids.
in bathrooms.
And I'm sorry, but you can go look at that information anywhere online, and if our
Exactly.
court system was on top of it,
Right.
that wouldn't be happening
Right.
either.
So the underlying fear is not valid. Is not a valid fear. So you know, it's people have fears, and sometimes fears are justified, and sometimes fears are not justified. And the fear of trans people in bathrooms is not a justifiable fear. And you can't hold a whole community hostage because there might be some
An
straight guy,
incident. Right.
you know, who is a pervert who would do something, you know, like, how do you blame an entire group of people for somebody that's not even them, you know? And
Yeah.
so
It's not like the transgendered are out there molesting and raping kids.
yeah, they're not.
They're not.
They're not. Yeah.
Would you please tell me a little bit about Dragunation?
Draguation.
What is Draguation?
Draguation is we run a summer program called Queer Academy, and so it's both an academic and a self-exploration and a leadership program.
Is it like Glee?
It's except they don't sing. They have daily campfires, and you know, and they do lots of. It's actually a blow-up campfire, but it's a little blow-up campfire.
Safety.
Yeah, but they, you know, they have workshops and they do research, and one of the things they explore is their own internal identity. Who are you in the world? And so each person sort of creates their own drag persona, and it's very thoughtful, and they do a lot of work and thinking around that, and then it comes together in a performance at the end of the show that the public's invited, and they introduce their drag persona at this event. It's really fun.
That's
and
awesome.
then they graduate from the program, but we call it draguation because they tend to do it in drag. And we had one kid this past year that came in barely making eye contact with anybody on the first day, and in the final performance she did a performance art piece. Like that's 6 weeks between those two things. Is really pretty.
That's beautiful.
Pretty amazing, yeah. So that's what Draguation is, and the summer program is. We've been doing it for about 8 years, and it started because queer kids were hanging out in the office all summer, and we couldn't get any work done. So we had 2 interns that summer, and we said, "Listen, could you put together a program? Put together morning and afternoon workshops, for 6 weeks, and keep these kids busy because we got to get some work done in here." And it was great. That first year, the kids that were part of that created an ally workshop as part of that they then presented at a conference in Boston and a conference in California. They spent their afternoons. One of their afternoons, we said it learning about queer history. They called it interviewing old gay people. And
That is so funny.
And so it was so successful that it just sort of took off, and now it's really a program, and that it runs every summer.
That's beautiful. Family effort.
Yeah.
And you have all kinds of stuff that you do here. You have Friday nights.
Friday night activities. So we every Friday night from September to June, there's a free activity from 6:30 to 8:30. The first Friday of the month is Pagan discussion night.
I like that.
Yeah,
the old religion.
Right.
Going conservative,
religion,
huh?
Right. And then there's a drag night. There's an open mic. There's a craft night, a game night. I mean, there's all different kinds of things on Friday nights. And then the fifth Friday of the month, every month that has a fifth Friday, it's an intergenerational discussion of some sort. And we're now organizing for the 25th annual conference, which is going to be March 16th and 17th at the University of Connecticut in Storrs. So we're soliciting workshops from people.
So if anybody's listening.
Yeah, and it's ourtruecolors.org. Go online, set a workshop, and you know, where people come from usually the conference attracts about 3,800 people, and presenters come from all over the country. So it's an opportunity for people who are working with LGBT folks, especially young people, to really present cutting edge information on education, on curriculum, on advocacy, almost anything.
That's terrific.
Right, because the conference is for queer youth and everybody that's responsible for their health and well-being. So there's a track for youth and their allies. There's a track for family members, for educators, social workers and clinicians, clergy, and an activist track and a general track. And so there's 7 or 8 different tracks.
What about the hairdressing? What about the styling?
Well, there is a makeup track.
Okay, good.
It's not a track. It's a workshop, and so there's workshops on makeup. There's workshops on doing drag. There's workshops on coming out to your parents, on coming out to your roommate. And there's also dance workshops and yoga, and because we're really looking at kids as their whole selves.
Yeah.
And not every kid wants to go to a workshop and talk about gay stuff. So
right.
They might just want to go do hip hop. So we make that available too.
I know a lot of lesbians who don't play softball.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Well, if you're listening, please get involved, especially if you're in Connecticut, because you're right here. Mm-hmm. And you can come meet Robin and come down to this center. I've never been here before today, and I'm blown away by how awesome it is.
Well, thank you.
And everything looks very well organized. Even your stacks that have been here since maybe the 90s.
The 90s, right.
It's still very organized. And it's wonderful here. It's a great vibe.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
OurTrueColors.org. Get on it, Connecticut. Get involved. Make a difference.
That's it.
Doing the good work here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was fun.
You're fun, Robin.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robin, for the hard work you've done and also for donating an hour of your extremely valuable time to come sit down and speak with me. Thanks for listening, y'all. Please join me at lisalandry.com. You can sign up for my newsletter and get a free audio download. We are releasing this podcast on National Coming Out Day 2017. And I want to say I love you to my partner, Kim. And Ari, this is your shout-out, special sweetheart. Your mama and I want to read you a bedtime story. It's called You Should Be Asleep Already, Boo.